Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The wind howled across the barren desert, swirling clouds of dust and debris that shimmered faintly with the remnants of long-lost magic. Alice, a lone gunslinger with a scar that ran jagged across her left cheek, narrowed her eyes as she pushed forward through the gale. Her long coat flapped behind her, the fabric scorched and singed from countless battles. In one hand, she gripped her modified revolver, a relic of a time when technology ruled the land, now fused with the arcane powers that had returned to the world like a forgotten storm. Ahead, the outline of a ruined town loomed through the dust storm, its dilapidated structures barely standing, half swallowed by sand and time. This was just one of many such towns scattered across the wastelands, once thriving centers of trade and industry, now nothing more than graveyards of a fallen civilization. Alice had been to many, searching for the same thing, the wheel of fate. She paused at the outskirts, scanning the empty streets. Nothing moved. Only the faint whisper of the wind carried on the air, bringing with it the occasional creak of a broken sign or the skittering of loose debris. She tightened her grip on the revolver and stepped forward, her boots sinking slightly into the sand. Inside the town, shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, the afternoon light bending in strange ways. Alice's instincts flared. Magic. She'd seen this kind of warping before, and it rarely meant anything good. As she ventured deeper into the town, she heard a voice, low, rasping, barely more than a breath. "You seek the wheel, done to you." Alice turned sharply, her gun drawn in an instant. The voice came from a crumbling building to her right. Stepping through the doorway, she saw him, a man slumped against the wall, his skin pale and covered in runic tattoos that glowed faintly in the dim light. His eyes were glassy and blood pooled around his abdomen, dark and sticky. "Who are you?" Alice demanded, her voice cold. The man coughed, a wet, ragged sound. "Does it matter? I've seen it." "I've seen the wheel." His eyes flickered, trying to focus on her. "But you won. Till you find what you were looking for." Alice lowered her gun slightly, intrigued despite herself. "And what exactly am I looking for?" The man laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You think you're after a prize, a way to change your fate. But the wheel, it takes as much as it gives, maybe more." Alice stepped closer, kneeling beside him. "Where is it?" He reached out a trembling hand, pointing toward the horizon. "North, beyond the wastelands of the dead and the ruins of the old city." His eyes flicked up to meet hers, and for a moment, clarity returned to his gaze. "But beware, they were coming for you too. You won, TB, the only one chasing the wheel." The light faded from his eyes, and his hand fell limply to his side. Alice stood slowly, holstering her revolver. She had heard stories of the Wheel of Fate for as long as she could remember. A relic of the ancient world, it was said to hold the power to reshape destinies, to undo the past and forge a new future. For years, she had searched for it, driven by a memory she couldn't truthfully trust, a past that felt more like a dream than reality. As she turned to leave the ruined building, she felt it, a ripple in the air, a faint tremor beneath her feet. Magic, dark and twisted, approaching fast. Her hand was on her revolver before she even realized it. A shadow moved at the edge of the street, and then another figures, draped in dark cloaks, their faces obscured by hoods, emerged from the alleys and broken buildings, circling her like wolves. There were at least 5 of them, and the way the air around them shimmered told Alice they weren't her human. The leader, a tall figure with glowing red eyes, stepped forward. His voice was smooth, almost polite. "Alice, I presume. We've been expecting you." Alice didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her revolver was out, and the first shot rang out, a flash of blue light crackling from the barrel. The bullet hit its mark, but instead of flesh, it struck a shimmering barrier, disintegrating before it could make contact. The figure smiled beneath his hood. "Impressive, but you'll need more than that to stop us." Alice gritted her teeth, quickly assessing her options. They were using magic to shield themselves, a standard defense for sorcerers, but it wasn't trying vulnerable. She'd have faced worse. With a flick of her wrist, Alice activated the sigils engraved on her revolver. The runes glowed, and the next shot was different, a pulse of raw energy that cracked through the air like thunder. This time, the barrier shattered, and the figure staggered back, clutching his chest where the bullet had grazed him. But the others were already moving. Magic crackled in the air as they conjured blasts of fire and lightning, hurling them toward her with deadly precision. Alice ducked behind a crumbling wall, the heat of the spells singeing her coat as they exploded around her. She could hear their footsteps closing in fast. Alice knew she couldn't pull them off for long, not without backup, and she had no allies out here, but she wasn't turned out of tricks yet. Reaching into her coat, she pulled out a small spherical device, a relic from the old world, half tech, half magic. She twisted the top and tossed it into the street. There was a brief whine of energy, and then the sphere detonated in a flash of blinding white light. The sorcerers screamed, their magic faltering as the pulse disrupted their spell. Alice didn't hesitate. She vaulted over the wall, her revolver blazing as she took out the nearest figure, then another. The leader was still reeling, clutching his head as the magical interference scrambled his senses. Alice closed the distance in an instant, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "Who sent you?" she growled, pressing the barrel of her revolver against his throat. The man coughed, a pained smile on his lips. "You'll never find the wheel. Gunslinger. Not before we do." Alice's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." With a swift motion, she knocked him out cold and let him slump to the ground. She didn't have time to interrogate him further. The others were starting to recover, and she couldn't try another fight. Instead, she turned and sprinted out of the town, her heart pounding. North, the wastelands of the dead. That was where the wheel was hidden. But now she knew she wasn't 10 and the only one after it, and whoever these sorcerers worked for, they were willing to kill to get there first. As Alice rode into the fading light, her thoughts drifted back to the cryptic words of the dying seer. The wheel turns for all, but only the true bearer can break its cycle. What had she meant by that? And why did it feel like the answer was tied to the memories Alice couldn't trust, the pieces of her past that felt like they had been taken from her, altered by some unseen hand? The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert. Alice rode on her revolver, resting in her lap, her mind sharp and focused. There was no turning back now. The wheel of fate was out there, and she was going to find it, even if it meant confronting the darkest parts of herself along the way. The night deepened as Alice rode through the wastelands of the dead, a desolate expanse of cracked earth and jagged rock formations that stretched as far as the eye could see. The only light came from the pale flickering stars above, casting an eerie glow on the land below. The silence here was oppressive, broken only by the occasional whisper of the wind as it swept through the barren terrain. This was no ordinary desert. This was a place steeped in ancient magic, a graveyard of forgotten civilization. The air itself felt heavy with the weight of history and law. Alice's thoughts churned as her horse navigated the rocky path. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, lurking just beyond the edge of her perception. It wasn't paranoia. This place had been the site of countless battles between magic and machine, where powerful forces clashed and left behind dangerous remnants. Dark energy pulsed faintly beneath the surface, like the heartbeat of the dead. She knew it wasn't Shelks, just the sorcerers from earlier who posed a threat. This land had its own dangers, and anyone who traveled through it risked more than just their life. Her revolver, a constant weight at her side, was a source of comfort. Its brightness glowed faintly in the darkness, a reminder of the power she held. But it wasn't enough. Not against the forces she felt closing in on her, and not against the truth that gnawed at her. Something about her past was wrong. The memories she had, the life she thought she had lived, it all felt like a lie. Serious words echoed in her mind. The wheel turns for all, but only the true bearer can break its cycle. What had the seer meant, and why did she feel like the answers she sought were as dangerous as the wheel itself? Up ahead, a shimmering distortion appeared in the air, like heat waves rising from the ground, but darker, more malevolent. Alice slowed her horse, squinting into the distance. The distortion pulsed, growing larger with every second until it stretched across the entire horizon. It was a rift, an unstable tear between worlds, a byproduct of the ancient magic that still lingered here. She had seen rifts like this before, and they were never a good sign. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the rift, and Alice's hand instinctively went to her revolver. From the darkness, creatures emerged, twisted, malformed beasts, their bodies a grotesque fusion of technology and dark magic. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their metal claws scraped against the ground as they advanced. Alice drew her revolver and fired, the blue energy bolt crackling through the air and striking the nearest creature. It exploded in a shower of sparks and dark blood, but more were coming. She dismounted her horse, knowing she would have to fight her way through this. Her movements were swift and calculated, each shot precise, but the creatures were relentless. They surged toward her in waves, their metallic limbs clattering against the rock. Alice gritted her teeth, ducking and rolling as she fired shot after shot, the glow from her revolver lighting up the night like bursts of lightning. One of the creatures lunged at her from the side, its claws aiming for her throat. She spun, kicking out with her boot and sending it sprawling, then fired a bolt of energy that disintegrated it before it could rise again. But the rift wasn't T-closing. In fact, it seemed to be growing, and with it, more creatures poured through. Alice cursed under her breath, realizing that if she didn't find a way to seal it, she would be overwhelmed. She had seen rifts like this before. They were unstable, but could be closed with the right kind of magic. Problem was, she didn't have that kind of magic on her. Not yet, at least. Another creature, larger than the rest, charged at her, its body a hulking mass of metal and sinew. Alice aimed for its head, but it deflected the shot with a swipe of its claw. She dove to the side as it came crashing down, its massive limbs splintering the ground where she had stood. Rolling to her feet, she holstered her revolver and pulled out a small, sleek device from her coat, a tech magic hybrid she had acquired from a black market dealer years ago. It was a disruptor, designed to interfere with unstable magic fields like the one before her. She activated it, and the device hummed to life, emitting a high-pitched whine that sent the creatures into a frenzy. The rift began to flicker, its edges warping and distorting as the disruptor fought to close it. The creatures shrieked, their bodies convulsing as the magic that sustained them began to unravel. Alice used the distraction to her advantage, finishing off the few remaining beasts with quick, precise shot. With a final ear-splitting crack, the rift collapsed in on itself, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Alice stood in the aftermath, breathing heavily. Her revolver still raced as she scanned the horizon for any lingering threat. But the wastelands were quiet once more, the danger seemingly past for now. She reloaded her revolver and mounted her horse, her mind still racing. The rift had been no coincidence. It was as if the land itself was reacting to her presence, as if the forces that controlled the wheel were testing her. The creatures, the sorcerers, the distortions in reality, all of it felt too deliberate, too focused, to be mere happenstance. As she rode deeper into the wastelands, the sky above began to change. The stars flickered and shifted, bending in strange patterns as if the fabric of space was unraveling. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath her horse, cyclops, began to crack and crumble, revealing veins of glowing molten rock beneath the surface. The further she traveled, the more the landscape seemed to twist, until the world around her no longer resembled the barren desert she had entered. Instead, it was something otherworldly. She had entered the final stretch of her journey, the realm that lay beyond the wastelands, the place where the wheel of fate was said to reside. Here the laws of nature no longer applied. Time itself seemed to bend and warp, twisting back on itself in loops and spirals. Shadows moved on their own, flickering in and out of existence like broken images in a mirror. Ahead in the distance, she saw the ruins of the ancient city. Towering spires of cracked stone and twisted metal jutted up from the ground like the bones of a long-dead giant, their surfaces etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the darkness. The wheel of fate was somewhere within those ruins. She could feel it. As Alice approached, she dismounted her horse and cautiously made her way through the crumbling archways and shattered streets. The city was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of magic that lingered in the air. She moved carefully, her revolver at the ready, her eyes scanning every shadow for signs of movement. And then she saw it in the center of the ruins. On a raised platform of stone stood the wheel. It was massive, towering over her, its surface covered in intricate patterns of glowing runs that shifted and twisted as if alive. The air around it crackled with energy, and Alice could feel the weight of its power pressing down on her like a physical force. But she wasn't alone. Standing at the base of the platform was Ezra the technomancer who had betrayed her. His face was hidden in shadow, but she could see the faint glow of his runes as he raised his hand toward the wheel. He didn't seem surprised to see her. If anything, he seemed to be expecting her. "I told you, Alice," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "You can outrun your fate." Alice leveled her revolver at him, her finger tightening on the trigger. "You're right, wrong. I've been outrunning it my whole life." Ezra chuckled, a dark, hollow sound. You think the wheel will give you the answers you were looking for? It won't top. It will only show you what you already know. She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the wheel. The temptation to reach out to touch it, to rewrite her fate, was overwhelming. But something held her back. The seer seller words echoed in her mind again. Only the true bearer can break its cycle. Ezra stepped forward, his hand outstretched. It's Sarge, too late, Alice. The wheel has already turned. You were just a pawn in a game that's been played for centuries. Alice's heart pounded in her chest. She knew he was right about one thing. There was no turning back. She had come too far, and the truth, no matter how painful, was within reach. With a deep breath, she holstered her revolver and stepped toward the wheel.